Welcome back to the Daily Meditation. Today we're going to be discussing the self and the type of relationship that you should have with yourself. Now, the self is a pretty confusing thing, specifically because there are so many different definitions of self. So what exactly is the self? Well, to begin with, there is the spiritual self. That is the center of our consciousness. And from that, we get the idea of non-self, which we'll look at just a little later. We then have the psychological definition of self, which is more about our self-identity in terms of our values, our beliefs, and how we perceive the world on an individual level. Then we have the everyday version of the self, and we think about words like self-obsession or selfishness or selflessness. And finally, closely related to the self is the ego. Now, Sigmund Freud explained that the ego is the part of our minds that creates our sense of reality, and it operates on a conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious level. We're going to look at all these things, and I'm going to share a meditation to give you the perfect relationship with yourself. So let's start with the spiritual self. What exactly is the spiritual self? Now, there are different definitions, of course, because there are so many different spiritualities. However, it is generally agreed that the spiritual self is the part of our consciousness, the very center of our consciousness. If you think about how you perceive the world, if you just bring to mind for one moment the fact that you are conscious, and now ask, where does that consciousness arise from? That part is the spiritual self. Now, from the spiritual self, we get the idea of non-self. So non-self is basically the idea that there is nothing at the very center of our consciousness. And that's a core concept in yoga, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, and indeed in many other religions and spiritualities. Indeed, many people practice a form of meditation called Self Enquiry. Now that's where you meditate on your consciousness and you continually look at where your consciousness comes from. And as you perceive your consciousness, you begin to realize that your consciousness actually stems from this place of nothingness. And then you get in contact with that place of nothingness. Now that's really important because when you connect with your empty mind, you find liberation from what Hindus would call moksha. So when you meditate on the innermost part of yourself and you achieve non-self, it's incredibly liberating. And that is why most spiritualities say that we should have non-self. But here's a question for you. If we should have non-self, then why should we also be self-aware? And this confusion comes from the fact that the psychological definition of self is completely different to the spiritual definition of self. The psychological definition of self pertains to our self-identity. That is, our beliefs, our thoughts, the things that we care about. For instance, my self-identity is that I'm a very caring, compassionate person who wants to heal others. I'm a very creative person. And I'm a fun person too, to be fair to myself. So those kind of things are your self-identity, right? Now, while we should have non-self on the spiritual plane, and we should be aware of the emptiness at the center of our consciousness, we should also have a keen sense of self-identity. Indeed, a lack of self-identity is a symptom of borderline personality disorder and dissociative personality disorder. So we need a keen idea of our self-identity. You need to know who you are, what you care about, what are your beliefs? What are your values? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Now, there are a lot of benefits to having a good idea of your sense of self-identity. For instance, it reduces biases, it informs you about your place in the world and how you can be of value in the world, and it improves self-esteem and self-confidence. So to get a keen idea of your sense of self-identity, you'll want to ask about your beliefs, about your values, about who you are as a person. So far, we have seen that we should have non-self in the sense that we should be aware that the center of our consciousness is empty. And that's very important because emptiness is inherently liberating. If there's nothing there, then there's nothing holding you back. You can be anything. But at the same time, we must have a keen sense of self-identity, and we must be aware of our values and our beliefs. So, how can you achieve total non-self while also having a keen idea of self-identity? Now, I'm going to teach you a meditation technique that is going to give you the perfect relationship with yourself. In this meditation technique, we're going to start with mindful breathing. Then we're going to go into self-identity. No, we're not. We're going to start with mindful breathing. Then we're going to do self-inquiry. And self-inquiry will show us the nothingness at the core of our being. After that, we're going to touch on some contemplative meditation for self-identity and our place in the world. And then we're going to finish off with some more relaxing mindful breathing. So by the end of this meditation technique, you will A, be aware of non-self, but also B, equally importantly, have a keen sense of self-identity. Now, I'm going to lead you through each of the steps. You can either do them as you watch this video, in which case just pause after each of the steps, or just listen to the instructions and then afterwards take your own time and go through it. So let us begin. Naturally, we're going to sit with good posture and lower the chin. And I'm going to ask you to use Jayana Mudra. Voila! Jayana Mudra! Okay? So just place that, your hands, on your lap. And then you're going to close your eyes and just breathe mindfully. Just observing the breath moving through your body. Now, as I mentioned, you can do this now and just pause the video and continue to breathe, or just listen to the instructions and continue afterwards. And we're going to take a minimum of 1/4 mala of breaths, which is 27 breaths, or approximately 5 minutes of mindful breathing. Now, when you've done those 27 mindful breaths, I want you to become aware of the center of your consciousness. Where does your consciousness arise from? What is at the center of your being? You should be able to notice complete emptiness there. And I would like for you to meditate on that emptiness for a minimum of 27 breaths again, or 5 minutes. So now you have realized non-self and you're aware that there is nothingness at the center of your being. Now we are going to bring to mind our self-identity. Simply contemplate, spend 5 minutes or 27 breaths simply contemplating who you are, what your values are, what you believe in, and what you care about. Either pause or do this afterwards and just contemplate your self-identity for just 5 minutes. And now we want to be aware of how our self-identity plays out with the identity of others in the real world. So bring to mind other people whom you know. Consider their identity and how your self-identity is similar or different to theirs. Notice how we share some qualities. We also have unique qualities. And that's all part of the colourful life that we live. And finally, I would like you to be aware of what Sigmund Freud defined as ego. And that is, be aware that there is a part of your mind that creates the sense of living in present moment reality. And just take a few moments to contemplate that. Again, pause. Or if you're doing this after listening to the video, continue for 5 minutes. And then just take a few deep breaths to relax. And so what we've covered in this video is all senses of the self. There's the spiritual self, or the center of our consciousness, and that sense of non-self, of there being emptiness at the center of our consciousness, the fact that our consciousness arises from nothing. But then we've also touched on our self-identity, who we are, what do we care about, what are our beliefs, what are our values. We then contemplated how our self-identity interplays with that of other people. And finally, we've become aware of the part of the mind that creates the sense of being alive in present moment reality. And that is a complete overview of the self. So to summarize, you should be aware of nothingness at the center of your being, but also aware of your values and your beliefs and what you care about and how that self-identity interacts with other people. And finally, how your ego produces the sense of being alive in the present moment. My name is Paul Harrison. If you would like to book a meditation lesson with me and uncover your true self, you may do so using the link below. Thank you for watching and remember to subscribe.